Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another webinar by SwissChem Indonesia. For those of you who does not know me, my name is Pinkan Mokalu and I'm the Executive Director of SwissChem Indonesia. So today's webinar with the title of Managing and Leading People Through Change is brought to you by our Human Capital Development Sectoral Group. Thank you to all of you who are attending today, and a very special welcome to our speaker today, Professor Julie Hodges from Durham University Business School, and also to Pak Henry Chia, the CEO of Anderson Hauser, who is also our Head of Human Capital Development Sectoral Group. Before I hand over to Pak Henry, there are a few housekeeping rules that I would like to go through. So first, today's presentation material will be sent to you after the live session, and a recording of the session will be available at our website for SwissChem members only. Second, please place your microphone on mute during the presentation in order to avoid any noise disturbances. And finally, if you have any question for our speakers anytime during the presentation, please feel free to type them in the chat section. We will address your question at the end of the presentation. And also, one last thing is please stay around till the end. We have a lucky draw with 5 prizes for 5 lucky winners, which is Professor Julie Hodges' book, Employee Engagement for Organizational Change. So without any further ado, I would like to kick things off by inviting Pak Henry. Silakan Pak Henry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Pinkan. Really appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you all. Selamat sore Bapak dan Ibu semuanya. Saya mengucapkan selamat beribadah puasa bagi Bapak Ibu yang menjalankan. I'm very delighted to welcome you to this webinar focusing on the change management. And I'm particularly honored that a specialist in change management and authors of the several books, Professor Julie Hodges, joining us in this webinar. Professor Julie, welcome, and I thank you so much for your time. I know that you're extremely busy, but yet you still make time for us in Indonesia. Professor Julie is an Associate Dean for MBA and BBA program of the Durham University Business School in England. Professor Julie also listed in the 100 B2B thought leaders and influencers you should follow in 2021 by Thinker 360. And I think Professor Julie is also the leading expert on the change in organization, particularly the role and the impact of the people during transformation. She has 20 years experience in several profit and non-profit organizations, including PwC, British Council, where she was part of the development consultancy for East Asia in the past. Professor Julie is the author of several books around the themes of the organization changes and managing people. Her latest book is titled Reshaping the HR, the Rule of the HR in Organizational Change. And she's also the members of the editorial board for the Management Consulting Journal. So welcome and thank you so much, Professor Julie, for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, one of my friends said that in just 1 year, really just 1 year, everything has changed dramatically, and all business now are being forced to reassess our change capability far beyond managing the technical tasks. But we are forced to recognize leadership and employee sentiment becomes so important. We are now much more familiar with the terms such as empathy, resilience, innovation, well-being, openness, empowerment, and the list is going. So in the old day, in the model of the change management as we knew before, we need to create a sense of the urgency for a change to happen. And we don't need to create that anymore, as the year 2020 already did that for us. So in 2021, I think it's more a time for us to move from the crisis management to a change management. But the question is that what type of the change management whether it still stay the same as we understood, or we need a different type of the change management. But for sure, we understood that the change management now it become much more complex, more complicated to deal with. So through this webinar and together with the Professor Julie Hodges, I hope that we can get a very good insight for all of us how and how we can reassess our change capability so therefore we can maneuver through 2021 and beyond. So I'm very pleased to present this webinar to all of you, and I hope you will find this very useful and can create impact to your business. So Professor Julie Hodges, I hand over the stage to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Pinkan and Henry for that introduction, but also thank you for inviting me to come in and talk with you today. I just want to share my screen, so let me just check that you can all see my screen. Okay, is that okay? Everybody can see my screen, okay?
Yes, all
brilliant.
is good.
Okay, good. That's excellent. Okay, what I'd like to do is just very briefly is to just recap, introduce myself. I think Henry did that really well. I began my career working for the British Council, and then I moved to work for an outsourcing company, a startup company called Vertex, as head of commercial consultancy there. At that point, I was headhunted and I went to work as a senior consultant working on transformational projects across the globe with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I was headhunted at that point by one of my clients in the financial sector, RBS. And I guess it was that point in my career, I decided I had been part of large organizations, international organizations, for a long time. And it was at that point I wanted to do something that I was passionate about, that I could share knowledge, that I could continue to learn. And I had done a part-time PhD when I was working with the British Council, which had looked at the impact of change on levels of stress among middle managers. And I'd always enjoyed research, but also I'd always enjoyed running workshops and teaching. And the opportunity came up to join Durham University Business School. So I have been in academia since then. And I must admit, it's a privilege to be doing the work that I do and to focus in the area I'm passionate about, which is about organizational change, but particularly focused on people-centered change, which is what I want to talk with you about today. That's my background. I would like to hear who you are and where you are today. So could you just in the chat box introduce yourself? So could you add your name and just your role? What are you involved in terms of the work that you're involved in today? So if you could just put that in the chat box just now, everybody, just introduce yourself, that would be great. Okay, that's good. We've got some coming in there. Excellent. Okay, so whilst you're doing that, let me just take you through the aim of the session today. We are going to look at how leaders and managers can engage people and what I call co-creating change so that they are committed to it and ensure that the change is sustainable. Now, this has a caveat because I recognize that sometimes change cannot be co-created. So if we think about the impact of COVID, at the university, when we were told within the space of 24 hours that we had to close down and we had to move our teaching online, there wasn't time for us all to sit around and discuss, how are we going to do that? What will that involve? We had to do it. What I want to talk about is where there are opportunities to actually plan change, discuss it, involve people. Because from my research, it shows that whenever people, key stakeholders, employees, for example, are involved in change, the change is more successful. So the agenda is to look at some of the factors that drive engagement with organizational change. And this is based on my probably about 20 years of research. So what you are hearing today has an empirical foundation in it. There's evidence to back up what I'm going to tell you. We'll look at things like identifying key stakeholders. It's really important when any change happens that we are aware of who will be impacted by that change, but also who will influence it. So who has the ability to influence that change to ensure that it happens, and also who has the power, and whether that's power that is positional in terms of they may be a managing director, they may be a CEO, they may be a team leader, but also who has that relational power. So that's the relationships that they have in the organization. We'll look at appreciating why people react in certain ways to change as well, because some people really grasp change and are excited and enthusiastic about it, but other people may oppose it, they may resist it, they may push against it. And then we'll touch on assessing readiness for change as well. So really in the space of the next 40 minutes, it's going to be a high level in terms of each of these areas. So I want to begin by telling you a little story. And this story is about somebody called Perkin, and he is just like you or I. He has experiences, he's got hopes, he's got aspirations, he's got organizational experience. And this story is about Perkin being faced with change in his living conditions. So we'll take it as similar to change in his organization. So Perkin lives on an island, and he's lived on this island for many years. In fact, Perkin was born there and has set up home in the island. So he's used to it. He's used to that status quo. Now, the question is that there are changes happening and Perkin has to move to the other island. So my question to you is, how do we get Perkin to move from where he is on one island to the other island? If you just like to put your answers in the chat box now. How can we get Perkin to move, to change from where he is very comfortable on one island to move to the next? So yeah, we could create what's called a burning platform. You could create this fire. There's this urgent need, isn't there? This urgent need to do something different. There's this dissatisfaction with the status quo. So things aren't working well. Any other things? Yeah, what we might do is we might send in a rescue. Yeah, we might send in, give him a boat to rescue him, a ladder to get to the boat. And if faced with a really urgent issue for organizational change, some people choose not to make the change. They want to just not be part of it, but they'll still want to escape. So they'll want to use that boat to get away from the situation. From an organizational perspective, the burning platform may incentivize people to go on the change journey, or it may incentivize them to exit, to leave the organization. And how many of these people may stay, but also oppose the change as well? And these are some of the issues that we need to look at when we are considering how do we manage and lead change in an organization. But look, Perkins missed the boat. He hasn't reacted quickly enough. But what we have put on the other island is we've put a cafe. And this cafe symbolizes a vision. Yeah, organizations where they have the vision or they have the future strategy, something that's enticing, something that may encourage people to move from the status quo to the future. However, do we think the cafe will appeal to Perkin? It's interesting, my colleague, when he tells this story, he has a pub there. So that's what incentivizes him. Or other people might have a gym or something, yeah? The strategy, i.e. the cafe, has to be attractive and relevant for it to lead to real engagement, yeah? And it's about being able to look at what will engage people in change, that will resonate with them, that will encourage them to make that shift. Okay. Oh no, look at that. Things never work well, do they, in organizations? The boat has sunk. Yeah. So Perkin has no option now. He has got to stay where he is and he's got to make a decision. Oh, but hang on. what do we see? There's some sharks hovering here. So the risk is getting worse, isn't it? And making that move, making that change is not without danger. And these sharks will be different to different people in the organization. It may be something about them thinking about, is my job going to change? How will it change? Will I be working in a different team? Will I still have an office? Will I still have a desk in the same place? So it's about being able to identify what these sharks are. What are the risks that people see about making change? So what could we do? We know we've got a burning platform. There's some sharks there, but on the other island, we have this vision, this CAFE, this strategy. What might we put in place to get Perkin to move from the island? And you're right, I see some of you have said that we could put a bridge in, couldn't we? Yeah, so we're putting something in that is providing some safety from moving from the status quo to moving to the future strategy. And this bridge is often the equivalent of a change plan. It's what we will do to make sure that the change becomes something that is part of the routine, is something that encourages people, that they can engage with it. Yeah, so it's really about how individuals will perceive this bridge, how long it is, how safe it is it something that they want to cross over to? Okay, so we've got the bridge. What else might help Perkin move over? What else? Put some other ideas in the chat box now. What other things might help? Yeah, as somebody has said, somebody else. There's somebody else there that's encouraging them, somebody else that's made that journey, that's made that transition. And this could be, it could be a mentor in an organization. It could be a change champion. It could be an advocate of the change. So it's somebody to help and to encourage Perkin to make the journey themselves. Okay, Perkin's still not convinced. We need something else. Ah, a helicopter. So the helicopter may make the journey easier, but do you think all organizations can afford a helicopter? It can be expensive, can't it? A helicopter can be expensive. And can you remember these films, these movies where the main character is marooned on an island or a desert island, and in the distance there's a boat or an aircraft that comes to rescue them? The main character becomes really excited and jubilant as they think they've been saved, only to see the rescue vessel sail or fly off over the horizon. And in organizations, we do see this, that they will promise, they'll promise that helicopter that'll come and rescue people. They'll provide resources to support more staff going through the transformational change. And the promise is made about, we'll do this if you do this, but sometimes it doesn't materialize, and that can have an impact on levels of trust and levels of engagement. So we need to think about that in terms of making sure that anything when it comes to leading and managing change, there's levels of trust. Okay, so let's see, what have we got here? Okay, the helicopter's flying off, it's flying away, but there's still things that need to be put in place to help Perkin make this journey. And we have there the chair, you'll see, and we have a life belt. And what these symbolize are feelings of safety. So the life belt provides some safety for Perkin crossing that bridge. And also in terms of the chair is a place to rest. It's a place to just, you know, maybe if Perkin needs to take a little bit of time out and take some stock before he continues his journey, there's somewhere that he can sit, somewhere he can rest. And the place to rest has two main purposes. It provides space to reflect on the change journey so far and to celebrate progress and celebrate success. Actually, Perkin has started this journey, he's halfway there, but also to learn from the experience. So is he going to cross the bridge the same way for the second half as he's crossed it for the first half? But it's about reflecting on the change journey so far and about planning the next stage. And that's important when we're looking at leading and managing change, about learning and about reflecting. Okay. So let's move on. So we know that there's a safety net now. We've put a safety net in because Perkins still got some opposition to it. So it's a safety net, which is adding reassurance. It's providing that enhanced feeling of safety. And in organization, this might be additional training, mentoring, coaching, workshops. It's also important, I think, in terms of change to look at treating everybody equal and with dignity and respect. And about thinking about what assistance people might mean that are leaving the organization too, so that they can share a positive experience with others. So you can see here some of the things in terms of what's required to be considered when we're leading and managing change. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to think about what does this look like realistically in organizations? How do we make this happen? What are some of the implications for that based on our story of Perkin? So let's look at how we engage people with change. So what I want to share with you is a model that I have put together based on research, and I'd like to take you through each element at a very high level. So I'm not going to be able to give you detail on each of those, but at a high level, what is it that research shows needs to be done to effectively manage and lead people through change? So key elements, if we look at here, if I can get this pointer. So we have stakeholders, trust, dialogue, and that's having conversations with people. It's about assessing the readiness. So how ready are people for change? Because we know in organizations, particularly over the last year, the amount of transformational change has increased rapidly. The pace of change has increased rapidly. It's about co-creation. So it's about inclusivity. It's about including people in decisions. It's about giving people the opportunity to share their ideas and their thoughts. And it's about what I call proactive leadership. So let me take you through each of these. Okay. So let's begin with stakeholder engagement. And why is stakeholder engagement important? And let me just give you a very brief definition of what I mean by stakeholder engagement. Stakeholders are the people that are impacted or they're affected by organizational change. And it's important that stakeholders can be internal within an organization, so they can be the employees, but they can also be external. They can be customers, they can be clients, they can be partners, they can be part of the supply chain. And organizations are very good at looking at their internal stakeholders when it comes to change, but not necessarily external stakeholders. So why is this important? It's important because getting stakeholders to engage with change is contagious. So my research shows that where managers and leaders actively encourage stakeholders to be part of the decision-making, part of sharing ideas, part of coming up with ways of behaving and working differently, it can be contagious. It can actually spread positively in an organization. So the more people that start to be involved, the more it can spread out across the organization too. It can impact on organizational effectiveness and individual well-being. And I think this is really important, that change always needs to have specific outcomes. And ultimately, change should not be for change's sake, but it should be because it's impacting on the effectiveness of the organization and also on individual and organizational well-being. So that's on the health, the welfare of the employees in the organization. And then the third reason why stakeholder engagement is important is it sustains benefits of change. And the very first book that I wrote on change was called Sustaining Change. And the reason that I wrote it was I'd spent 20 years working in different organizations across the globe where I had seen projects being implemented, often projects across different countries. And one of the things that people used to say to me was, the change isn't working. You know, we spent thousands of dollars on this change and people aren't working differently. We spent thousands of dollars on this new IT system and it's just not giving us back the benefits. It's because one of the key elements that's missing in change is about sustaining the change. And it's really important that when we're looking at managing and leading change, that we see it much more in a cyclical process than a linear process. I'm not a lover of linear models of change. There are a lot around there, and what they miss out is actually change doesn't happen because you go through steps 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. It doesn't. It's not going to be successful. It has to be in a cyclical manner. So it's about sustaining it. It's about looking at how the benefits, about what's being increased, decreased, improved, is actually embedded in the organization itself. And there's a great model. I'm a real fan of simple models. And this was a model that we used in PwC and that I've adapted further for my work. And it's about understanding stakeholders, understanding how they see the perspective of an organization and change in the organization from where they are standing in the organization. And if you look at this hilltop model here, you'll see that in terms of, if you think about it, okay, you're standing here. So if you're standing here on your hilltop in your organization and you're looking down, what are you seeing? What are you seeing from your hilltop? Can you just put in the chat box now what you see from your hilltop? What are you seeing when you're looking down from your hilltop? What you're seeing. Okay, so you're probably, this is probably the area that you're seeing, isn't it? Yeah, so you might see this, the building here with a cross on it, and you're going to see these other two buildings, aren't you? So that's your perspective. Now let's go across to the other hilltop, and we've got a member of your team who's standing on this hilltop. So what are they seeing? Just put in the chat box, what are they seeing from their hilltop that's different from your hilltop? Yeah, exactly. They're seeing this, aren't they? This is their perspective. So they're actually seeing the building that's got the smoke coming out of it, and they're seeing 1, 2, 3, 4 smaller buildings, in fact. So where we stand in an organization, we do see things differently. So what do we have to do then? What does that mean when you're leading and managing change? What do you have to do? What does that mean you have to do? What do you think? Just put it in the chat box now. Yeah, absolutely right. You have to move across to the hilltop of where your team members are, your employees are, to understand, or where your stakeholders are internally and externally, to look at their perspective of the world. And this is why often people say to me, Julie, how do we deal with people that are resisting change? And I'll say to them, so what are their issues? What are they resisting? What are their views of the change? And people come back and say, we don't really know. We just know that they're saying they don't want to be part of the change. It is about, to address that, it is about understanding people's perspectives from their hilltops. And it is about asking the questions about what they see, about what the change means to them as well. So really simple model, but it's really effective. And it's a model that I have used with very senior business people in international organizations. The most interesting time was when I used it with a group of women, professional women in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. So it just shows you that these models can be used across different countries. So, okay. And it's about doing a stakeholder analysis. So I don't want to go into detail here because there are different matrices that can be used, but it's about being able to map your stakeholders in terms of their influence and their power as well, along with their interest in the change. And then considering which are the stakeholders that you need to focus in terms of gaining their commitment, getting them involved in decision making. Which are the stakeholders where there's the least effort required? Which are the ones where they need to be kept satisfied? So you may need to just keep them up to date with what's happening and keep them engaged in terms of maybe they're part of the program team. So it's about being able to really identify stakeholders and come up with a stakeholder plan that ensures that all of the key people are involved in the change itself. Key questions to ask stakeholders are how clear are stakeholders about what the change is and what is trying to be achieved. One of the reasons that has come up in the research that I have done about why change fails is because people do not have clarity on the rationale, the reason for the change. So it's about making sure that stakeholders are clear. They know the reason for it. They know the business reason behind it. It's about looking at how prepared and informed are stakeholders about what the change means for them. And remember, that will mean different things depending on their hilltop. How supportive are stakeholders of what the change is trying to do? So are they an advocate or are they a blocker? And if they're an advocate, how can you ensure that they are, you're using their energy, you're using their enthusiasm? If they're a blocker, then how do you address some of the reasons they have for opposing the change? And then the other question is, what capability gaps are preventing them from being committed to the change? And often when people do oppose change, it's because they have concerns that they don't have the skills, the abilities to be able to implement the change effectively. So moving around, next element is about building and maintaining trust. And trust is really interesting because trust is something that takes a long time to build in an organization, but it can be broken very quickly. And it takes a long time to repair. And the trust is all about focusing on really being open and honest. It's about creating a safe environment where people feel that they can share ideas, share fears and hopes about what needs to change in the organization. It is about managers and leaders being able to focus on what's best for the organization and the employees within that organization too. But also trust is built up by managers showing they have the capability, the competence to be able to put into practice and implement change effectively too. So it is based on management credibility and reliability. So when managers say they will deliver something, it's about ensuring that that does happen. Trust also is based on the psychological safety. And we saw that when we're talking about Perkin, we had that safety net, didn't we, in fact? And that safety net is a really key element that helps to engage people in change. If they feel that it's safe to be able to take part in discussions where there are opportunities to raise any issues or concerns, where they're able to provide feedback and get some clarification on what's changing and how it's going to change too. And there's a great exercise that I have used with many groups across the globe that look at just starting to give people that opportunity to build trust, but it also creates a safety net. And it's something that can be used with teams. And it's about focusing on giving people the opportunity to think about, first of all, what will they keep as a result of the change? It's often when there's a major change happening in an organization, people tend to look at the negative. What are we going to, what are we going to lose? But it's good to start by looking at what do we keep? What won't change? Yeah, because there's always things that won't change as a result of transformational change. It's good to look at what will we gain? Yeah, so what's actually going to be positive about this change? Perhaps we'll have a really super new whizzy computer system. We'll be able to access customer records much quicker than we have previously. So what are the benefits? So what will improve, what will increase, what will decrease as a result of the change? But also importantly, because there is loss when it comes to change, what will they lose? So they may lose the fact that they will no longer be working with the same people that they've been working with for a number of years. But it's an exercise that works really well. And with teams that I have used it with, I find that once they start to look at what they will keep, they will gain, and the benefits of change, they start to see the change not as something that's going to be negative, but something that they can build upon as well. Okay. And an exercise like this can be used to create dialogue. And I'm sure lots of you have read books about change and the need for communication. And certainly it was something that I put into my PhD nearly 30 years ago. And I haven't changed my mind that I think communication is an absolutely vital part of managing and leading change effectively. But within that, there is a need to have dialogue. And considering we're all working in an era of Zoomification, that's been quite tough over the last year. And dialogue is about having one-to-one or team discussions. It's not about sending out emails. It's not about sending out texts. And the reason why dialogue is important is because you'll see this graph in front of you, is research shows that in person or in group communication has the highest impact when it comes to being effective. Now, there are more and more organizations these days who are relying on email and on text, and that's fine, that has its place, but it's got to be backed up by giving people the opportunities for dialogue, to have these discussions. And that's really what makes effective communication. So engaging people through dialogue is about giving them the opportunity to voice their opinions. So it's about giving them the opportunity to talk, but importantly, it's about managers and leaders listening and understanding what individuals are saying. So it's about talking, listening, and understanding. And that gives us the safety net again. So again, thinking back to Perkin, what are we, that safety net, that life ring as well. It's about giving people the opportunity to raise any issues or concerns. And this takes us into something that I call the ZUD, the zone of uncomfortable debate. And change does involve having to discuss things that are quite uncomfortable. And if we look at the zone of uncomfortable debate, we have 3 levels. So the first one is the zone of what we call comfortable dialogue. So these are the conversations that we may have generally about what works in an organization, what doesn't work in an organization. We then move into the area of the zone of uncomfortable debate. So that may start to think about, much more about actually, what is it that we need to do differently? What's not working? How do we need to change it? What's the impact on people's behavior? And then it takes us right down into this area, which you might be familiar with. It's getting to the real root cause. It's the heart of the matter. And when I'm teaching, I teach MBA students a consultancy module, and I keep saying to them that it's not about looking at what the surface issues are. It's about getting to the root cause. What is the root cause that needs to be addressed and needs to be changed? And that is getting to the real core of having these ZUD discussions, the ZUD dialogue. And there's a number of ways that can be done. You can use different models such as fishbone diagrams, but there's also a number of questions that I have outlined in one of my books. So if anybody's interested in the whole ZUD process, drop me an email. I'll put my email in the chat box at the end, and I will send you how you can go down into these different levels to have that ZUD discussion too. It's very important. Feedback is also key. Again, it's got to be two-way. It's got to be up, down, and across the organization. So effective managing and leading people through change is all about not just telling them what they can do. Absolutely not. It's about getting feedback. It's about encouraging those ZUD discussions. So let's move on to readiness for change now. And it's really interesting. In the research on organizational change, there's really only a couple of articles that have been written on this area. And there's very limited research. But it's fascinating when I do work with organizations, I can see light bulbs going on when we start to talk about readiness for change. And people start to think about, actually, we really need to think about, are we ready for this change? And particularly, I think in the current climate where there's a change fatigue going on, we've had so much change in the last year. And readiness for change is the employees' beliefs, and I should say stakeholders' beliefs, attitudes and intentions regarding the extent to which changes are needed and the organization's capacity, so not just capability, but capacity, so space to make those changes too. And I think it's a question that organizations need to really ask themselves now after a year of really turbulent change. Are we ready for more change? And there's ways that you can assess change. So again, if anybody's interested in that, I can send you more details. But assessments for readiness for change involve looking at what I call the ghosts of changes past. It's a bit like you're driving along and you look in the rear view mirror to see, actually, what have we learned from previous changes? What's worked well? What's not worked so well? It's about looking at how willing and able and capable are people to change. Are people ready to take on more uncertainty, more ambiguity? Because transformational change is uncertain. When we kick off a transformational change, you know, when we're moving from Perkin from one island to the next, we never quite know what the final outcome will be. So there has to be that tolerance for ambiguity. There has to be the tolerance for risk. And again, Perkin making that journey across that bridge, there was risk involved. You know, it looked quite a rickety bridge. Has to be resilience. So resilience is all about people being able to bounce back. Yeah, it's having that energy, that enthusiasm to bounce back. And all of that requires resources, both in terms of time, people, finance as well. So there are checklists that can be used to assess readiness for change in an organization. Co-creation. So co-creation is all about working with people. It's about co-producing change together. The days of change coming from the top of an organization down have gone. I think there's much more of an approach to looking at how we can make change happen across an organization. How can we co-create it? And there's a wonderful quote from Linda Hill at Harvard, who says, people don't want to follow a leader. A lot of my fellow professors at Durham talk about leadership being followership. Actually, no, we don't want to follow leaders now. We want to work with them. So people don't want to follow a leader to the future. They want to co-create it. And I think we have seen that since the global pandemic hit, that actually more people are starting to co-create how they are working, how they're working from home, how they are engaging with their fellow employees in different ways, in fact. So I think it's a really powerful quote there from Linda. So the co-creation is about connecting, it's about communicating, it's about collaborating, it's about committing to working together. And there's different ways that this can be done. And it will depend on the culture of your organization, the nature of your business as well, what works well, particularly. So finally, proactive leadership. So it's really about pulling this all together. And proactive leadership and management of change is about creating that sense of purpose. So go back to Perkin, there needs to be this sense of purpose. Why should Perkin move from the island he grew up in to move to the other island? He was quite fine where he was, yeah. But actually, as we saw, there was that burning platform, there was that fire, there was that urgency that needed to make the change happen. It's about sense building, so creating some sense, some rationale for why change needs to happen. And then about bringing people together to gain their commitment. And that commitment should start right at the beginning. It shouldn't be something that happens once the change plan is in flow and it's being implemented. The most effective change happens when stakeholders are involved in discussions at an early stage. And it's about sponsorship. It's about leaders particularly maintaining their engagement and sponsorship with change throughout the whole transformation as well. Yeah. It is about collaboration, which again links back to co-creation. Change also involves energy. There's no doubt about it. I mean, that's certainly something that I have learned. It's about, to do change properly, there has to be energy, there has to be enthusiasm. And part of that sponsorship element is that leaders and managers have to create that energy, to create that, you know, that sort of resilience in people, that helps them to build up and helps them to cope with not just one change. You know, there's never just one change happening in an organization, but to work with multiple changes. So there we go. Tigger, life's not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce back. And I think that's what we're finding at the moment with all of the change that's happening as an impact of the global pandemic. It's really, people are having to be very, very resilient at the moment. So let me just finish by posing some questions for you about what I've talked about so far. Stakeholder management. So think about, what can you do to engage your stakeholders in change? Yeah, which key stakeholders do you need to include more in change in your organizations? And how might you do that as well? With co-creation, how can you build teams to co-create change? There's a lot of research now coming out that focuses on the importance of change, the importance, of teams in change. So how might you build teams? And particularly, again, in this, the environment, the online environment that we're all working in at the moment, how might you do that within the online space as well as the face-to-face space? Building trust. So what can you put in place to enable individuals to raise questions and concerns? What's the safety net that you can put in that says to people, actually within this organizational culture, it's okay to say, actually, could we do this differently? Or this just doesn't work. Or I have an idea, can I share that idea with you? Create space for dialogue and shared thinking. So in this time of Zoomification of work, how can you create space for dialogue and shared thinking? How can you do that? What might work well? Because it's one of the things that certainly organizations are beginning to find there's a real need to ensure that they are innovative, they are creative in order to deal with the changes that they are facing. And then readiness for change. So what can you do at an individual level, but also a team level and an organizational level to ensure people are ready for change and that it will impact positively on their well-being? Yeah. So there's the 3 levels that you need to think about there: individual, team, and organizational. And then finally, proactive leadership. What is it critical that only you need to retain oversight of? I think, what do you need to do to shift from a top-down approach to change to much more of a people-centered approach to change when you're looking across the organization, but you're also looking internally and externally at your stakeholders? So back to Perkin. There we go. Perkin has made the shift to the other island, but very much that is based on our model that we have covered just now about leading people-centered change as well. So these are the elements that we need to consider to help make that shift. And just finally to say that I have covered a lot here. It's been at a high level. There are a number of books that I have written that do provide much more detail in terms of some of these elements that we have covered today as well. Okay, thank you for that. I'm very happy to take questions or comments now from anyone. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Professor Julie. So we'll begin our question and answer session. If anyone would like to ask any question, please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask away.
If I can go first, Pinkan, and
Yeah,
I have one question for Professor Julie. Julie, based on the employee experience in 2020, how do you see that experience impacted into the employee to absorb new changes? This is the first question. Is that they are much more ready or they are not? I mean, the capacity is much reduced because of the experience they had in the 2020. And you talk about the burning platform. did you see that what happened in 2020, it somehow creates the burning platform for the employee, whether like it or not like it? And based on that experience, would it make the organization, or would it make the employee much more easy to become a partner to co-create change for this year and for the future? How you look at into the experience the employee have in 2020 impacted into this aspect? Yeah.
It's a really good question, Henry. Thank you for that. I think what 2020 has shown us when the global pandemic first came is how people do have the capacity to change. If you think about it, if I think about it within the context of the university in which I work. So Durham University had been talking for years about online teaching. They had been talking about it, they had been debating it, they had been looking about whether we should be doing it or not. I had produced a MOOC on leading and managing people through change, which was quite innovative. We had an online MBA. But apart from that, they were just, they weren't really moving forward or making any decisions overnight. And it was overnight, we all had to move to online teaching. And I saw colleagues who had told me they wouldn't teach on the online MBA, that they didn't believe in online teaching, have to make the transition very quickly. And that's replicated in organizations across the globe. So it does show that people do have the ability to change when they have to, when there is that sense of urgency. I think what we're seeing though now is that because the last year there has been so much change, and it has impacted on people's not just work life, but their home life as well, that there is some change fatigue setting in. So I think but also, so on the one hand, there's some change fatigue, but on the other hand, there's also a lot of experience being gained from people about how they have adapted to changing their work, how they work, where they work, and who they work with. So I think organizations need to make sure that they are listening to their employees to find out what works, what doesn't work, and what the future will look like. So it's a really good opportunity now for organizations to encourage people to think about what does the future look like? Are we all going to go back to working in offices? Are we going to stay working at home? Or will there be some hybrid forms of working? But what does that mean? And what do people need to effectively work in a different way too? So that's the one thing. But the other thing is, I think it is about looking at that, the change fatigue that people have gone through, and not making change for change's sake either. However, I also think that there's been massive opportunities that have occurred from how we are using technology, for example, that we mustn't lose sight of. The pandemic has just accelerated the application of technological innovations. And it's how do we continue to use that as well, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Do we have anyone else who would like to ask Julie's question?
Yes, hello. I have a question about that that graph on communication. Now that we are constricted by or restrained by the protocols of safety, of trying to keep distance, we're looking at your graphs showing that the communication is better off when it's done person to person, when the message or the content is quite complex. How do we go about this when it's more, how do you call this, it's easier for people to send out text messages rather than having a person to person call, like a video call, something like that. It's easier for people to do the just send by text or just a picture, most probably through the WhatsApp or the social media using our handphones, smartphones. So how do you see this as a kind of what suggestion would you like to give in order to have a better a shifting towards the better way of communication, which is face-to-face rather than being based on this being reliant on this gadget for sending out text messages?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's at the moment when we have these constraints, it's about how do we use technology to do that? So
Yes.
it is about how, we're using Zoom this morning, which is fantastic because we're having this session with, I'm in the UK, you're in Asia. It's amazing. So I think it's how we use technology to effectively do that as well, because I think this form of communication is here to stay. I think it is something that will always be with us. And it's how we use it effectively. As you say, it's so much easier just to send an email rather than either calling somebody. But I think we need to be careful because, an email is a very static form of communication. In fact, it's good if you want to get a general message out to a lot of people about something that's changing. So it's about, if you want to give information, an email is fine. But if you want to get views and discuss something, then you do have to have either a face-to-face like we are doing or a face-to-face in person.
Yes, thank you.
Terima kasih, Pak Ephraim. Next, do we have any more questions?
Hello, hi Julie.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Donil, also an ex-PwC. So, okay, so thanks for the insight. I had the opportunity in one change management project. Like you said, the first step is to assess stakeholder change readiness. We did some in-depth interviews and FGD with several stakeholders. Well, they accept and support the changes, like verbally, we accept the changes. The change is really beneficial for us, but at the end of the day, they finally resist. So I started with the inconsistencies that they showed from the change readiness sessions and also when the project is undergoing. So that's how do we assess true change readiness and gain honest feedback? Because because we are Asians, we are not accustomed to disagreement. We are not accustomed to what you call conflict. So how do you have tips on that? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So the first thing that's really important to say, and I always say to everybody is what I've been sharing with you. You need to adapt it to the context of your culture, whether that's your country culture or your organizational culture. So that's the first thing. So therefore, I think it's about thinking about, did you really know their perspective from their hilltop? Did you really get the data that enabled you to make an analysis of what the key issues were? And if not, then how could you do that better? How could you really understand their hilltop, their perspective? What would work there for them? Yeah. And that may be different forms. So it might be questionnaires, it may be one-to-one interviews. Some cultures that I've worked with are much more open and honest if I'm doing a one-to-one interview with them rather than if they are in a larger group, or it may be small focus groups. So that's why it's whatever form is best for the country and the organizational culture as well. Yeah, and sometimes it's about doing a mix actually. So I have recently done a piece of research that is in Africa, and I've had to use focus groups and I've had to use one-to-one interviews as well, because it was clear that I wasn't going to get the data I wanted through sending out a questionnaire. And also it's about follow-up too. So it's really important once you've gathered that data is to follow up and say, okay, so, so many people are saying this. Is this correct? Is there anything that we have missed? So follow up is really important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Donil. So Julie, there's a question from one of the participants, from Mr. Sansenbach from the Swiss Embassy. I will read the question. Change as a constant and as a result, change fatigue is a problem. Think of multinational companies who are in constant change mode. And the question is, what's the impact generally on people psychologically and physically from your perspective or view? And how do we address these problems?
Yeah, again, a really good question, and you're right. Change fatigue is a real issue, because always within an organization there's more than one change going on at a time. It's a bit like an S curve. So you start off with one change in the shape of an S curve, and then you might be halfway through that S curve when another major change kicks off, and so on. I think this is where it's really, really important that managers and leaders are aware of the impact of change, the emotional impact of change on people, the impact on their well-being. And in my book, Managing and Leading People Through Change, I have written quite a lot about the emotional aspect of change, because change is an emotional process and it does have an impact on our stress levels as well. So I think the first thing is about managers and leaders being mindful that change does impact people's well-being. It impacts their health, it impacts their stress levels. Some people have a high level of resilience, so they can bounce back pretty quickly, and that's often based on their previous experience of change, how often they have been involved in organizational change too. To address it, I think organization, if wherever feasible, I think organizations need to be to ensure they put in some support. Now that support could come from the HR function, if there's an HR function in the organization, but it's about making sure that there's some support put in place to help people. It needs to be part of a change plan, whatever that might be. It may be sessions on how do you cope with the pressure of change. It may be exercise sessions. It may, different types of sessions that can enable people just to make sure that they are coping and they're managing their stress levels. But it is something that does need to be recognized, definitely. Yeah. Now, what organizations, so how to help alleviate though change fatigue, goes back to the model that I've just looked at. So some of these elements that we've talked about this morning, they can help alleviate, reduce levels of stress too. And I think it is important that organizations, so leaders and managers in organizations, are aware of what they can do to help reduce stress levels.
Thank you, Julie. I hope that answered your question, Pak Wolfgang. Anyone else who would like to ask Julie while we're here? No? Okay. Pak Henry, shall we go to the lucky draw then?
Yeah, Pinkan, I actually did have another question for Julie. Sorry for that. I think Julie, based on your experience discussing with the business leader, for example, I think most of us now still operating in the short-term sprint. I mean, whether it's wrong or right or wrong, we tend to understood the agility as looking into a bit of the short-term KPI. And I think it's still valid for 2021 this year. So because that also gives us a little bit of flexibility to adjust when things is not moving into what we are anticipated, for example. So based on your experience, how would you advise us looking into the long-term view? How are we going to, but the question is really about how long we should continue to operating into the short-term view, and how would you advise us to anchor into the long-term view as well? How to move into that direction? I think the experience that we had in 2020 somehow still bring us into a little bit of the anticipation mode in 2020 to say that don't commit into anything long-term, but more into the short-term KPI metrics. So if anything happened, then we can just quickly adjust and move. While all the long-term project initiative, let's postpone it for a while. So how you see that we can transition into the long-term view?
I think it's about having both a long and a short-term view, Henry. I think the organizations I see now, particularly with, I would say within the tech industry, have never stopped looking long-term. I think it is about actually, yes, there are still things that need to be done in the short term, but it's about looking longer term about what does this mean for, you know, just take the impact of the global pandemic. What does it mean longer term for work, ways of working, and workers too? So I think we need to start, that needs to be done now. And it's about having these discussions. It's about looking at a strategy, you know, or getting a strategic framework in place that has these longer term KPIs, which can always be reviewed, definitely. But I would say there's a real need to look forward now. Yeah. And use your teams, use your employees to start having these discussions. You could do you could do a review with them about, okay, you know, it's a whole year now that we have been working like this, or we've been reacting to the impact of the pandemic. So what have we done that's worked really well? Because there's lots of things that people, I'm amazed by how people have adapted. So what has worked well, but what are the things that we need to do differently moving forward? So it's about looking at the lessons, using these lessons to start to inform the future strategy.
All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say to everybody, I have put my email address in the box. So if there's anything, you know, if you want to follow up or you want any other information, do contact me. And the other thing is, I don't know how many of you are on LinkedIn. Anybody on LinkedIn? Have we got a show of hands? How many of you are? Yeah, we've got a couple of people. If you're on LinkedIn, then do please, you know, link in with me, because I do put quite a lot of data up there about organizational change as well. So I'd be happy to share with you. I'll just put my LinkedIn profile, a link to my LinkedIn profile in the chat box just now. Let me just do that. Okay, so that's there. So do please connect with me on LinkedIn if you have a LinkedIn profile.
Thank you. Okay. So if we don't have any more questions, I think before we close, thank you very much for Professor Julie. And before I give the floor to Pak Henry to close our session, we are going to do a quick lucky draw. So we actually have 5 copies of Professor Julie's book. If you can see Hanum's screens, that is the book titled Employee Engagement for Organizational Change. So we have 5 free copies for 5 lucky winners. And we will do the lucky draw with the assistance of Arsha. This is very high-tech, everyone. Okay, first name, please, Arsha. So Mr. Daniel Koppel, okay, congratulations. We will contact you through email after this. Next name. Mr. Alfeno Rudi, congratulations. Next one, please. Bapak Heri Kusuma. Okay, the 4th one. Ibu Teti from SIGPA. And the final name, please, Arsha. Pak Heru Chandra from United Chemicals. Thank you very much. Our office will contact you directly to ask about the address to send the book. Okay, so Pak Henry, I'll give the floor to you one last time to close our session today.
Thank you, Pinkan, and congratulations for everyone who won the book. I need to say that I'm a big fan of the Professor Julie book. So I have a couples every time that she produces a new book, then I will take it as one aspect because the topic is very much into my heart. And the second, I can assure you that the Professor Julie book, despite it is coming from the university, but it's not so scary and very easy to understand and then easy to read. Yeah. So I think once you read one book, then you will be addicted into it. Thank you so much, Julie, for your very good insights about the change management. I think most of us agree that this is a very deep, I would say, complicated or intricate topic to deal with. But nevertheless, this is the thing that we need to get it through, and we are needed more than before because of the COVID-19. So I hope that today's session will really give a very good insight to all the participants on what you might be, some of the best practice through the discussion that we can use to take our organization to maneuver into the 2021 and beyond. Of course, if you still have the question, I believe that Professor Julie would be very happy to address it. You can send it directly to Julie email. You can also send it to the Pinkan and also to the Secretariat of the SWIS-CHAM, and we will forward that to Professor Julie. I really thank you for everyone. Of course, for anyone who celebrates the Ramadan. Of course, this is today is the first day of the breaking the fast. So I hope you enjoy that with your family. And again, Julie, thank you so much for your time. And I hope when the pandemic is gone, then we can see you in person in Indonesia or in Jakarta. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for everybody participating into this webinar.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.